Well, welcome to our first webinar as officially being the Northern Midwest Learning Center. And if you've been on our webinars before, when we were formerly the Mountain Midwest Hub, you'll know that we make an effort to regularly host webinars that we believe will add to our movement's leadership development. And I am very excited and honored to welcome today's speaker, Ragen Chastain. Ragen is a speaker, writer, researcher, board-certified patient advocate, multi-certified health and fitness professional, and thought leader in weight science, weight stigma, and health. She's the author of the Weight and Healthcare newsletter, the blog Dances with Fat, the book Fat, the Owner's Manual, editor of the Praeger Anthology, The Politics of Size, co-author of the HAES Health Sheets, and co-founder of the Fit Fatties Forum. In her free time, she's a national dance champion, triathlete, and marathoner who holds the Guinness World Record for the heaviest woman to complete a marathon. A bit about today, Ragen has really graciously agreed to some unlimited Q&A time after our hour and a half of content together. So if you have questions, we will have that Q&A time starting around 1:30 Central Time, but feel free to drop them in the chat as well, and I will kind of save those to ask during Q&A. To answer a common question that we usually get, we are recording, as you probably heard when you joined, and this recording will be shared on link no later than tomorrow afternoon. I'll drop the link to that link post in the chat so that you're able to find it later, but I will turn it right over to you, Ragen. Thank you.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited about this. Let me get my slides going and we will get this show on the road. We today are going to talk about creating size-inclusive fitness spaces. Again, my name is Ragen Chastain. Pronouns are she, her. You can reach me at reaganandweightandhealthcare.com. So if you have questions that come to you 2 weeks or 2 years from now, feel free to reach out. I pretty much live to talk about this stuff. So background wise, I currently hold ACE certifications as a health coach, a group fitness instructor, and also a functional training specialist and fitness nutrition specialist. As an adult, I have been a dancer and choreographer. I was a competitive ballroom dancer. I also had a cabaret company in Los Angeles. Walking and running, I have that fun Guinness World Record, a triathlete, and co-founder of Fit Fatties, which is a Facebook group for people of all sizes who want to talk about fitness from a weight neutral perspective. And we've got a little over 11,000 members. So that's a little about me. Agenda wise, this is going to be a broad overview. I'm going to try to give a lot of different information. I know that people come to this with different degrees of information starting out. And so I'll try to get something for everyone. Please don't feel like you have to absorb all of this today. And again, it's being recorded, so you can always go back. Privilege is something I always want to talk about. Privilege is, of course, the treatment and the opportunities that we receive. It's also the difficulties and barriers that we don't face when we live in a dominant rather than a marginalized identity. I have a lot of privilege as a white person, cisgender, currently able bodied, and neurotypical, and more. I also experience marginalization as a fat person, as a queer person, and as a woman. And one of the things that privilege does is it puts us in a situation where we don't know what we don't know because we are not having the experiences of people with marginalizations that are different than ours. And of course, it's our responsibility to proactively seek out and learn how do these folks want me to use my privilege to dismantle that privilege. And that's something I work really hard at, but it's also a place where I make mistakes and I fall short. And so I'm always open to being called in or out on those mistakes. Intention wise, my goal today is to give you again as much information as possible that you can take back and use in the work that you do. Some of what I talk about today will be different than what you've taught, than perhaps what you've taught others, than perhaps what you're sure of. I've been studying weight science, weight stigma, health and healthcare for over 20 years at this point. And in that time, I have had all the feelings: anger, defensiveness, disbelief, incredulousness. And so, if that's coming up for you during any of my talk today, I just want to name that as valid and also offer that as an opportunity to explore and to dig deeper. I also want to acknowledge that most of the mistakes and harms that I'm going to talk about today are things I have personally done. And so it's not about getting mired in guilt or shame, though I certainly feel bad for the harm that I did. And I think that's reasonable. It's about learning so that we can do better moving forward. And again, there will be a Q&A at the end, so do feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go or to ask at the end. So let's start with some basic principles. The principle that underlies all of my work in fitness is that nobody is obligated to participate in fitness, but everybody should be welcome. And this is incredibly important to me because often in our culture, we treat fitness almost like a religion or a barometer of worthiness that people have to pass. And so I always want to be clear, this is nothing I say suggests that people are obligated to participate. I want to create a fitness world where everybody who wants to participate feels welcome and is accommodated. So let's start with language since we're going to be talking about size inclusive spaces. So fat. Fat is my preferred personal descriptor. It's also a reclaiming term with all the complexities that come with a reclaiming term. And so there are people who could be identified as fat who do not in any way align with this term, and that is completely valid. So the idea isn't necessarily that you would just start using the word fat for folks, unless it's you know that it's their preferred descriptor. The important thing is if somebody does describe themselves as fat in a way that's neutral or positive, then we're never correcting them. Oh, you're not fat, don't call yourself fat, right? Because suggesting that that's a bad thing is stigma in and of itself, since people are fat, whether they call themselves that or not. And so we just want to make sure that we are supporting people in choosing the labels that they prefer for themselves. I like fat because it's a reclaiming term, right? It kind of tells my bullies they can't have my lunch money anymore. You can't offend me by accurately describing my body. And it doesn't pathologize and medicalize my body in the way that other terms do, like quote obese and quote overweight. These are terms that were literally made up for the express purpose of pathologizing bodies based on shared size rather than shared symptomatology or cardiometabolic profile like we would see in an actual disease diagnosis. And they come from roots. So the word, quote, obese comes from a Latin word that just means to eat yourself fat. So more stereotype than science there. Overweight is an overtly shaming word. It just says there's a correct weight and you're not it. And it's important to understand the origin of pathologizing bodies based on shared size generally, the origin of weight stigma generally, the origin of the body mass index in specific. These things are rooted in and inextricable from racism and anti-Blackness. And I absolutely urge you to read or listen to Sabrina String's Fearing the Black Body and Deshaun Harrison's Belly of the Beast to learn more about how not only are these things rooted in racism and white supremacy and anti-Blackness, but they continue to disproportionately impact those communities today. Body mass index is an interesting example. So BMI was created by a statistician named Quetelet in the 1800s. And Quetelet was not a great guy. He was trying to figure out the proportions of what he called the ideal man. And in his own words from his treatise, anything that differed from those proportions would be, quote, monstrous and deformed. But he was pretty sure that the ideal man was a cis European white dude because that's all he included in his sample. And so this idea of this calculation of weight in pounds times 703 divided by height in inches squared, it's just a fancy height weight ratio. And it just appeared as a footnote in his treatise. But his treatise was based in the idea that the proportions of a cis European white dude would give us the ideal proportions. And so this has always been institutionalizing racism. It has never been a health measurement. It actually got pulled into health measurements because it was a cheap way for insurance companies to striate people for charging them, and pre-Obamacare for denying care based on the idea that a high BMI was in and of itself a pre-existing condition that they were not required to cover. And so my area of expertise is the intersections of weight science and weight stigma, health and healthcare, but I've developed sort of a subspecialty in the ways that the weight loss industry has consistently for decades sort of infiltrated and influenced and manipulated the healthcare and fitness industries. And the idea of quote obese and quote overweight and the use of BMI has been a huge part of that, right? The idea that simply existing at a higher weight, regardless of actual health status or symptomatology or cardiometabolic profile, constitutes a chronic lifelong disease that requires chronic lifelong treatment. And I want to be super clear, there's no shame in having a disease of any kind. It's simply that just existing in a larger body doesn't qualify by any definition. So the impact of this idea of pathologizing bodies based on size has been tremendous, massive, unbelievable profit to the weight loss industry. They're in the hundreds of billions at this point. A lot of stigma and oppression to the people within these classifications, and a lot of fractured relationships between higher weight people and fitness pros and healthcare professionals and the idea of health in general. So you may have heard the idea of person first language. And this is that the suggestion that it's less stigmatizing to say a person with quote obesity or a person with overweight, which I feel like weight stigma gives us enough problems without making us grammatically problematic as well. But beyond that, it's important to know this is not coming from weight neutral health community. It's not coming from fat acceptance community, size acceptance community, anti-diet community. This came directly from the weight loss industry. And their goal was to support this idea of being higher weight as a disease by separating higher weight people from their bodies. And they co opted this idea from disability community, where this concept is controversial and where there's a lot of transformation and change and transition happening. And I urge you again to read and listen to folks from that community to understand the nuances there. But absent any of those nuances, the weight loss industry kind of took this and plopped this onto higher weight people. And the problem with person first language, besides the fact that it makes us sort of unwitting marketers for the weight loss industry, is that it's actually more stigmatizing because we don't talk about bodies like this, right? No one has ever been like, oh, thank goodness, my friend with tallness is here. Finally, I can change that light bulb, right? Or, oh, you can't, my friend with blondness is actually going to sit there. That seat's taken. Or, oh, the man affected by thinness getting on the bus. I believe I know him. This is not how we talk about bodies. And so when we suggest that we have to talk about fat bodies in a totally different way, right, that just accurately describing them is so stigmatizing that it requires a semantic workaround, that is stigma in and of itself. And so, if we want true anti weight stigma language, what we're looking for is language that accurately describes higher weight bodies without pathologizing them or medicalizing them, and that wasn't used as a slur or taunt that might be triggering. And so, terms like higher weight, people of size, larger bodies. Throughout this talk, I will use these terms and fat interchangeably. I'll use quote obese and quote overweight when I'm talking about research that uses these terms, and I will not use person first language for higher weight people. So I want to start out with this. The good fatty, bad fatty dichotomy needs to die. And the good fatty, bad fatty dichotomy is the idea that people separate fat people into two groups. And it sounds like this, like, oh, there's two kinds of fat people. The people who take care of themselves and they, do healthy habits, I'm fine with them. But the people who are just lazy and sit around and, eat fast food or whatever, I'm not okay with them. Right. And I need to talk about this because I am privileged by it because I do happen to participate in fitnessy things. And so sometimes people will treat me better than they would treat another fat person because of that. And it's a huge problem, right? And the first thing I want to point out is that you could divide literally any group of people into these two groups, right? There's two kinds of blonde people, there's two kinds of Rotarians. What this is a way to try to justify weight stigma, right? If people perform health to my satisfaction, then I believe they deserve to be treated with human decency. If not, then no. That's a huge problem, right? And so I want to be clear that the good fatty, bad fatty dichotomy needs to die, and I want to personally help kill it, kill it, kill it. All right, now let's go and talk a little bit about health and fitness by whatever definition someone is using. And there are lots of them out there, which is the first thing I kind of want to talk about. So, health and fitness, these things are multidimensional, they're not entirely within our control, and they're really sort of gooey, amorphous concepts. And in our culture, we tend to like to think that they're easy to define or there's something you could like throw a dart and hit, right? Healthy. But when you actually start to look at an individual level, it's really hard to pin down, right? Because if you take a simple example, someone who is starting a fitness journey who has no chronic conditions versus someone who's starting a fitness journey who just got diagnosed with a chronic condition versus someone who's been managing 6 chronic conditions for decades. It's going to be very different what health and fitness look like for those folks. Right. And so when I talk about health and fitness, I'm never trying to create a definition that we're going to put people in or out of. I'm trying to talk about like, what does this look like from this person's priorities, individualized from their situation. And so that's whenever I'm talking about health and fitness, it's never like just a clear black and white definition. Health and fitness are not a barometer of worthiness. People are not better or worse based on their health status. That is just healthism, which does not make weight stigma or any other oppression a better look. And health and fitness are not an obligation. Nobody owes anybody else health or healthy behaviors by any definition. And this can be a tough one for folks. And it was for me when I first started kind of grappling with it because of the idea that like we owe our loved ones our best, quote unquote, best selves. And when I really started to think about it, I thought about things like the NFL, right? Which is created on athletes risking their short and long term physical and mental health in the hopes that one day their team will score enough points that they win a shiny piece of jewelry. You're absolutely allowed to do that, but it does not prioritize health. Right? There's a sport called skeleton in the Olympics, which I love to watch 80 miles an hour down an ice chute on a sled, face first. This does not prioritize the health. Right. And so what ends up happening is this idea of whether or not someone is quote unquote prioritizing their health, again, gets used as a way to justify poor treatment or stigma. And so it's important to understand nobody owes anybody else health or healthy behaviors, again, by any definition. The way that someone does define, prioritize their health and fitness, the path that they choose to take, these are intensely personal decisions and they're not anybody's business unless we ask them to make it their business. And in this room of people, a lot of people ask us to make it our business, right? That's a lot of our deal. And that's completely fine. But it's important to understand that they're personal decisions until people choose to make them decisions that they ask for help with. They include aspects of access and oppression and privilege that have to be addressed. They include aspects of culture that have to be respected. And so that'll be our working definitions around health and fitness. And again, the idea is that nobody's obligated to participate, but we want to make sure we're creating fitness spaces and experiences where everybody feels welcome and everybody is accommodated. So as we talk about size inclusive fitness spaces, I want to talk about different kinds of weight stigma and bias. And the first is intrinsic. And intrinsic is subconscious. Now, we live in a world with a tremendous amount of weight stigma and bias and stereotyping of higher weight people. And so, if we have internalized some of that and we're working from it subconsciously, that would not be a galloping shock. But it's our responsibility to examine for that and look for that and to do our own work to dismantle it. And so when people are working from intrinsic or subconscious bias, they're treating higher weight people differently. They're making assumptions and stereotypes about people. They may be mistreating higher weight people. And all of that is going on in the background. And so, again, we're responsible for the harm that we do, but it's something that we may not be immediately aware of. Extrinsic is conscious weight stigma and bias. These folks know they have negative beliefs and stereotypes around fat people. They're operating from them on purpose. The harm they're doing is intentional. Internalized weight bias. This happens when higher weight people internalize negative beliefs about their own body. And it can have a lot of negative outcomes. It can cause them to participate in their own oppression. It can cause them to participate in the oppression of other fat people. It can also cause them to disengage from self care. When people don't see their body as worthy of care, it's not surprising that they would not choose to care for it. And then structural oppression. Structural oppression is when things that fat people need, whether it's a chair, a physio ball, a weight machine, research, are created based on thin bodies and or to the specific exclusion of fat bodies. And all weight stigma and bias is systemic in nature, but structural stigma requires systemic changes, right? You can have a fully fat affirming personal trainer, you can have a fully fat affirming client, but if that machine was not made for that client's weight or size, that client can't use the machine. Right. And this is throughout, whether we're talking about a table in a restaurant or an MRI or a physio ball. If fat people don't have equal access, then they're not getting equal treatment. So, as we talk about this, let's talk about some common experiences that fat people have in fitness spaces. First, weight stigma while working out. And it begins often with blatant fat phobia and harassment. I was training for my first marathon. I was on a 9 miler and a car pulled over, like to park. I was on a sidewalk. And then somebody yelled, "Yo, fat bitch." And I was like, oh, that's probably me. So I turned in time to see them throw 2 eggs and an egg carton out of their car at me. And like, I had many questions. First of all, who throws an egg carton? Not aerodynamic, barely made it out of the car. But also, like, how do you miss a 300-pound target from 2 feet away with 2 tries. I almost wanted to chase them down, not just talk about their weight stigma, but about their throwing mechanics, right? I thought I could help there. But it really is incredibly often how often fat people who choose to participate in movement or fitness in public have people moo at them, throw bottles at them, often the same people who complain that fat people don't work out. Right. So this is an incredibly common experience. And again, because of internalized depression, a lot of higher weight people are not comfortable talking about these things because they feel like they deserve it, because they have such intense shame about it, because they don't realize like this is becoming their problem, right? The eggs are flying at me. It is my problem, but it's not my fault and it shouldn't be happening. And I'm not the problem here. The person mooing out of their car or behaving badly is. So that's blatant. Sometimes it's much more subtle, and that looks like unwelcome comments about your body or assumed goal, even if people think they're positive, right? So somebody's on a stationary bike and someone comes up and goes, "Keep going, you'll make it." And it's like, make it where, like, this is a stationary bike, ma'am. Also, I'm not sure what you're talking about, right? There's people will encourage you on your weight loss journey when you're not on a weight loss journey. People will cheer ridiculously for you. Like I have been in just like 5K fun runs with friends where 10 runners went by a bench and the person sitting on the bench did nothing. And when I went by, they cheered like I donated a kidney to their kid. And they were like, "Keep going. You can make it. You can do it." And I was like, "What about me makes you think that I don't know that? And why aren't you cheering for all the runners like that?" Right? So when we treat people differently because of how they look, even if we think it's a way to inspire them, it's still a way to treat people differently based on how they look. So again, these comments are often very well intentioned, but they can create fitness spaces where people just don't want to go. I teach classes to higher weight people about how to deal with this, and we teach things like wear big headphones and act like you don't know how to take them off, right? So this is a constant concern for fat people in fitness spaces. Unsolicited advice, often for people who have far less knowledge than we do, right? If you're a higher weight person who's lifting weights, somebody's going to come up and tell you you're not going to lose weight that way. You need to do cardio. If you're a fat person doing cardio, somebody's going to come up to you and tell you you're not going to lose weight that way. You need to lose weight, or you know, you're not going to lose weight that way. You need to lift weights. And like you didn't ask and you're not trying to lose weight. And yet here we are. And again, from randos at the gym. And so this is a common occurrence, again, that makes people not want to be in fitness spaces. Instructors making assumptions on body size. And this isn't down to instructors. As I said, I hold a bunch of certifications. And in most of them, there was a section about, quote, obese people as a special population. This is dead wrong and ridiculous. You cannot in any way tell from the way someone looks whether they're a beginner, whether they need options or modifications. All you can tell from somebody is their size and what your preconceived notions about their size is. I've been arguing with IDEA about this since 2009. Right. This is a huge problem within fitness. We don't want to make assumptions. I've been doing STEP since STEP was created. And I got my first fitness certification in 1996, right out of high school. And that's how I helped pay for my college, was doing group fitness instruction. And so, but still to this day, if I walk into a step class, there's, about probably a 7 out of 10 chance that the instructor is going to assume I'm a beginner and come up to me and just start talking to me, not ask questions, just start talking to me like I've never been to a class before. And that's a huge problem. We don't want to make assumptions about people. This also does a disservice to thin people who are beginners, who do need help, who do need some options or modifications, right? Because there's an assumption that they quote unquote look fit. So this idea of treating all fat people as a special population is absolutely wrong, and we've got to disconnect from that. And then there's instructors using weight stigma and fat phobia in class, right? And this can sound like work out so you don't have that muffin top, work out so you have that summer body. And I went up to a teacher after class, and like between queuing, everything was just weight stigma, the whole class. And I said, I just wanted to let you know that I'm not motivated by you telling the rest of the class to work out so they don't look like me. And she was surprised, and to her credit, really shocked. It had never occurred to her. And we had a conversation, and what it turned out was that it had never occurred to her that I didn't agree with that, right? That I didn't want to look different than I did. And so these are such, intrinsic beliefs. We get them from society all the time. I absolutely did this stuff when I was a fitness instructor starting out. I absolutely did all of these things. There's also incorrect information. I was in a Zumba class, and the teacher said, "Oh, you have to really do that hip motion because that will make your waist smaller. And I was like, we've really known this wasn't a thing since the 80s. So I went up after and asked her, like, by what mechanism does that happen? And she said, oh, when you twist your hips, it warms up the area and it melts the fat. And I was like, interesting. Like, where does it go, do you think? But we really, and she was taught this, right? She didn't make it up. And so it's important that we check our assumptions about how this works. And we're going to get into some science stuff in a minute. But all of these things can combine to create a situation where higher weight people just don't in any way feel comfortable or welcome in the fitness world, no matter what level their actual fitness might be. I talk to a lot of people who've had real messy breakups with movement, based on everything from early childhood education to the way they were treated at the gym the previous week. So it can come from like dodgeball or the president's physical fitness test or the pacer test. I don't know a lot of people who developed a lifelong love of learning through this kind of activity. Not having enough options. For a lot of us, the PE experience, no matter how well meaning our physical education teacher was around competitive sports and the idea of being like quote unquote good or bad, winning and losing, which there's nothing wrong with competitive sports. I'm incredibly competitive. I enjoy competitive sports, but it's not the only way to introduce fitness to folks. They were taught that exercise is punishment for or prevention of having a fat body. And so a lot of people who were higher weight, especially as kids, their relationship with fitness has been almost completely broken by the idea that they would only participate as a way to make their body smaller and that they are obligated to participate as punishment for having gotten fat. And for other folks, it's their relationship with exercise is around, I have to do this so I don't get fat. And so it's all rooted around weight stigma and anti-fatness. And a lot of misleading about the likely outcomes, right? In particular, around weight loss and changing of body size and shape. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Television shows, certain television shows that acted like what higher weight people need is enough emotional and physical abuse, and then they would get thin. Right. And we have now good research that shows that people who participated in, for example, The Biggest Loser lost weight and gained it back, which is, as we'll see, exactly what every study showed. But the idea that Jillian Michaels would be an example to anyone is absolutely horrifying to me. The idea that we would think that as fitness professionals, unless somebody specifically said, I want to be screamed at, I want to be berated, I want to be, treated poorly, then there's no reason that we would ever engage in those practices. And the way that Biggest Loser normalized that has done tremendous harm to the field and to fitness instructors who were raised believing that that's how you train a fat client, right? Is scream in their face and yell at them and berate them and belittle them. Again, being used as motivation or a cautionary tale for thin participants is a way that weight stigma works its way into fitness, being treated as a special population, right? That higher weight people are beginners, that they are unfit, that they require modifications or options. And again, absolutely nothing wrong with modifications and options. I love giving options to people. But the idea that I can look at somebody and know that they're going to need something is really problematic. The assumption that they know less than a fitness professional, the assumption that they fit into the fitness pro stereotypes about fat people. And then recommendations, the focus on weight loss. And also, I think the biggest disservice I see to higher weight people in fitness experiences is when they're told not to strength train. And this has happened to me personally multiple times. It happens all the time that I hear from people where they've been told, oh, you don't want to bulk up, right? So we're going to do cardio to get the weight off, quote unquote, and then we'll work on strength. And this is a huge disservice, one, because as we're about to see, it's not going to probably work to get the weight off, but also because mass moves mass. So to deny a higher weight person more strength is to deny them better mobility, better agility, better balance, right? And so uh, these persistent myths around higher weight people have impacted a lot of higher weight people's experiences and a lot of higher weight people's actual health and physical fitness. And then we have good old toxic fitness culture. And if you've seen the movie Dodgeball, when he's on the big screen and it says, here at Globo Gym, we're better than you, and we know it. That, friends, is toxic fitness culture, right? And toxic fitness culture creates insiders and outsiders. And you're an insider first by participating in fitness, but then based on level of participation and intensity of participation, right? And so it becomes really striated really fast, and it harms those it includes as well as those it excludes. So those who are included in the insider culture can feel tremendous pressure, right? To work out harder, to work out longer, to compete more, to never feel like they've done enough to, be in that true in group. And then, of course, it harms those it excludes by creating spaces that are not safe or accommodating or welcoming to those folks, and by creating fitness as something that is, like I said, almost a religion to people that other people are not allowed to join. And it does a lot of harm by encouraging those it includes to increase exclusion and harm, right? To feel like we're better than someone else because we participate in fitness. And I saw this after I finished my first marathon. I was the most last place that anyone has ever been in a marathon. The people who finished the marathon went home, took a shower, ate a dinner, caught a movie, came back. I was still on the course. But I finished and I was great, right? I was so excited. I had finished this marathon, and I started getting all of these people sending me this cartoon I had never seen before. And it said, "Don't feel bad. You're still lapping people who are on the couch." And I was like, well, first of all, I don't think people who were on the couch wanted anything to do with this mess. Right. But also, like, I was not feeling bad at all. I had gotten my medal, my Mylar blanket, and my banana. I was fine. I was feeling great about my accomplishment. But what that cartoon was about was the idea that I could not possibly feel good about myself unless I could find somebody that I was better than. And that is toxic fitness culture, and it does a lot of harm. I've got some examples here. So, pain is weakness leaving the body. First of all, somebody asks you this, like on a certification or kinesiology test. This is not the answer. This is not what pain is. But beyond that, while people are allowed to have this relationship with fitness if they want, the idea that it's the correct relationship, right? If you're not suffering and miserable and in pain, then you're not doing it right or you're not doing enough, is absolutely incorrect, right? There's nothing in the research that says that you have to be in pain in order to reap the benefits of movement. Skinny girls look good in clothes, fit girls look good naked. I picked this because it's wrong on every single level, right? The cis heteronormativity of it all, girls instead of women, male gaze, comparing bodies, it's just wrong, wrong, wrongity wrong. Your workout is my warm up. I hear this a lot in triathlon community, and it's like, who cares? Like, did somebody ask you? Just do your workout. This is incredibly, again, this way to figure out, like, how am I better than somebody else? You're intense, you're obsessed, you're not normal. You say yes when others say no. You rise while others sleep. You do what others will not. There's so much of this that's just based on this kind of comparison and being better than somebody else. And this top cartoon, it's Jean-Luc Picard looking perplexed, and it says, "Why would you make fun of a fat person at the gym when you have visible evidence that they are actively trying to fix the problem?" And someone, bless their heart, sent this to me and said, "Isn't this great?" And I was like, had to sort of break their heart and say, no, no, this is not great. It's not great on a number of reasons. First of all, fat people shouldn't have to be performing fitness to be treated well. Also, fat bodies are not a problem to be solved through fitness. And so I remade it just to say, why would you make fun of a fat person? Mind your own business. Right. So these are all examples of toxic fitness culture. And this is sort of the pool into which higher weight people are trying to wade, especially those who are either trying to recover from a messy breakup from fitness or trying to, check it out for the first time. And it does not make for a super welcoming environment. So when we create fitness that's size inclusive, and we're going to talk about what that means, we create fitness that's more ethical and evidence based. We create fitness with more benefits and less risk. And we create fitness that's more inclusive. Right. And again, higher weight size inclusive is certainly not the only axis, right? We have to work on anti-racism work. We have to work on being open and fully accommodating to trans and non-binary folks. We have to work on homophobia within the fitness culture. There's a lot of um, axes on which we work, right? Ageism, ableism, and more. But when we talk about size inclusive fitness, we create a lot of benefits. All right. So one of the things that we get told about fitness is that it will make us or our clients thinner. And this is what was the most surprising thing to me. About 20 years ago, I decided to find the best diet. the diet that had the highest efficacy. I have been yo-yo dieting for years. And so I decided, because my background is obviously research methods and statistics, that I would find the best diet by doing a literature review of the research. And I cannot stress enough, I was not in school. I did not publish. I didn't get credit. I had a corporate job. This is just the kind of mega nerd that I am in my life. And so I did this huge literature review, and I was so shocked at what I found that I actually went back and I did the entire literature review a second time, hours of work. And I was like doing calculations by hand and trying to figure out what I missed. And what I found was that there wasn't a single study where more than a tiny fraction of people actually succeeded at significant long-term weight loss. And that the vast majority of the time, people would lose weight short term and they'd gain it back long term. And I learned that this was not new information, right? In 1959, Stunkert et al. Looked at 100 patients in a New York hospital in a weight loss program and found a greater than 95% failure rate. But that's not all, because they went and looked at the previous 30 years of research and found the exact same thing. So at this point, research starting in the 1920s. In 1992, the National Institutes of Health issued a statement saying that the vast majority of people who lose weight will regain it. In 1999, that was replicated by Miller. In 2007, Manitomiyama. In 2013, the Australian National Medical Health and Research Council put this out as A-level evidence that they're as sure that almost everyone loses weight and regains it as they are that smoking causes cancer. In 2020, a Canadian, quote, obesity expert panel came to the same conclusion, and Gazer and Ngati in 2021. And so this is now 100 years of research that shows that the vast majority of people will lose weight short term and then regain it long term. So almost everyone we find loses weight short term within about the first year. About 95% regain that weight long term within 2 to 5 years, and up to 66% of people regain more weight than they lost. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with being fat or becoming fatter. I think there's something seriously wrong with something that's considered a health and fitness intervention that's prescribed to about 70% of the population that has the opposite of the intended effect the majority of the time. Right? Especially when we have all this hand wringing about, oh, people are getting fatter, with no acknowledgement that we've been prescribing something that makes people fatter, right? This is a huge problem. And so what the weight loss industry has known for a very long time and taken advantage of within healthcare, within the fitness world, is that this is two parts of the same biological response. When people try to lose weight intentionally, they lose weight short term while their body tries to figure out what's going on. But then no matter what those folks do, their body changes physiologically in the second part of this biological response to become essentially a weight regaining, weight maintaining machine, right? It drops metabolism. It increases hunger hormones and decreases satiety hormones. It will drop fast twitch muscle because it's too calorically expensive to keep. And so it essentially, the body transforms itself into a weight regaining, weight maintaining machine. And what the weight loss industry has done brilliantly is to take credit for the first part of the biological response, where people lose weight for a short term, and to blame people and get us to blame ourselves and get other people to blame us for the second part of the same biological response, where people regain weight. And we do this, and I did this inadvertently as fitness instructors, right? If people can lose weight short term, then they can lose as much as they want. And, there are people who have done it. So obviously everyone can do it. And that's just not what the science tells us. Right. And it's an incredibly problematic framework, and we give people the wrong information. So what happens is they start a fitness journey, and then they realize, they're regaining weight. And so they think, oh, this isn't working for me. So they stop. Right? Or they try something more extreme or more dangerous to try to lose weight rather than focusing on health. So this has been something that has been going on. Again, there's 100 years of research on this. And this is a bigger deal because trying to lose weight and then regaining weight is not benign. Right. I hear from people sometimes, they'll say, oh, well, it's the same as like quitting smoking. Quitting smoking is really hard, but like you have to keep trying. And the difference is that a smoker is healthier for every cigarette they don't smoke. Right. If somebody quits for 2 weeks and they go back to it, first of all, they're healthier for not having smoked for that 2 weeks. And they don't typically go back and smoke more than they did before. Weight loss is not like that. Right. When people lose weight and gain it back, that's called weight cycling. And there are some significant negative impacts to that. First, the risks that are associated with weight cycling are very much the same as those associated with, quote, obesity. That's from Gazer and Ngati, and we'll look deeply into their study in a little bit. Bacon and Affirmore found that attempts to lose weight typically result in weight cycling. As we've seen, weight cycling is by far the most common outcome of a weight loss attempt. Weight cycling independently results in increased inflammation, and that increased inflammation increases the risk for many diseases that get called quote unquote obesity associated. Weight cycling is also associated with poor cardiovascular outcomes and increased overall mortality. And in fact, Bacon and Affirmore found that weight cycling could account for all of the excess mortality that got blamed on quote obesity in both Framingham and the NHAES. And what happens is research that tries to correlate being higher weight with health issues typically does not even mention, let alone control for weight cycling. And so within the field of weight science research, there are well-known confounding variables. Weight cycling, weight stigma, and healthcare inequalities are all correlated with the exact same health issues that get blamed on simply existing as higher weight. And those confounding variables are not controlled for. The research that comes out on this is like fail freshman research methods bad. And so the problem is that the relationship between weight and health is at best much more complicated than we've been led to believe, right? And we are, in fact, driving a lot of danger to people's health by encouraging them to attempt intentional weight loss, which almost always results in weight cycling. All right, so we're going to hit the graphs and charts portion. If you're a nerd like me, this will be your jam. If not, I promise I will get you through this as painlessly as possible. We're going to start with Weigh et al. They looked at 25,714 adult cis men to see the relationship between cardiorespiratory fitness and mortality. Now, in this study, as in almost every study I'll talk about, there is no trans and non-binary representation, and there is an underrepresentation of people of color. And that is a consistent issue with research that never should have happened and certainly should have been solved by now. So looking at this, if we look at the gray bars, these are quote normal weight, quote overweight, and quote obese cis men who were not participating in movement. And we can see that their relative risk of all-cause mortality gets higher as body size gets bigger. What we cannot say is that this is caused by body size, right? Because of the confounding variables we just talked about. But we do see that it's there. If we look at these red bars, these are the same categories of cis men who were participating in 170 minutes of movement a week. And what we can see is that their relative risk of all-cause mortality is essentially the same, regardless of size. Matheson et al. Took this further. They looked at healthy lifestyle habits and mortality in 11,761 cis men and women. And the habits they looked at were 5 or more servings of fruits and vegetables, exercise more than 12 times a month, alcohol up to 1 drink a day for cis women and 2 drinks a day for cis men, and not smoking. And so here we have their graph, health hazard ratio on the y-axis, number of healthy habits on the x-axis. And then on top of each of those, normal weight, quote overweight, and quote obese. So each of these 3 graphs is over 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, which is the number of those 4 habits people were participating in. And so what we can see is people who are participating in 0 habits, there's a pretty big striation among health hazard ratio. Again, we cannot say this is caused by body size, but we do see that it's there. For people participating in just one of these habits, right? If they were just exercising more than 12 times a month, for example, that difference compresses significantly. By the time people were participating in all 4 of these habits, their health hazard ratio was essentially the same, again, regardless of size. Now, there are many, many things that impact our health that are outside of our control. But when we're talking about what recommendations can we give an individual, what we see over and over and over again in these studies is that health supporting behaviors are by far a better predictor of current and future health than is weight or weight loss attempts. So now we get to Gazer and Ngati, 2021. This is a huge study. They looked at 225 studies and meta-analyses about weight and physical activity and health. And they found that the mortality risk that gets associated with quote obesity is largely attenuated or eliminated by moderate to high levels of cardiorespiratory fitness or physical activity. They found that weight loss, even when it was intentional, was not consistently associated with a lower mortality risk. And this is critical because, again, one of the things that absolutely blew my mind when I really started to research this is that this is just an assumption, right? We see that if higher weight people don't live as long as thinner people, then we suggest the solution is to make higher weight people into thinner people, but that's not actually scientific. It's like saying we know that cis male pattern baldness is really highly correlated with cardiac incidents. So the solution is to get those folks to grow hair. Right? We have to ask about those confounding variables. How is the weight stigma and weight cycling and healthcare inequalities that higher weight people experience impacting their mortality? Right? Experience of weight stigma is shown to increase mortality by 60%. These are huge factors that don't get taken into account. And so the fact that what they found was that weight loss was not consistently associated with a lower mortality risk is really important in the way that we look at this. They found that increases in cardiorespiratory fitness and physical activity were consistently associated with greater reductions in mortality risk than intentional weight loss was. They found that weight cycling was associated with many adverse health outcomes, including increased mortality. And again, we saw that before. And they posited that adherence to physical activity might improve if healthcare professionals emphasize the myriad benefits of physical activity and cardiorespiratory fitness in the absence of weight loss. And again, this is critical because the message that higher weight people get and the message that we get as fitness professionals about them is that fitness makes people healthier because it makes them thinner. And in truth, it just helps people support their health, right? The benefits are direct. And it's the same with other health supporting behaviors as well. And so again, it causes disengagement because people start a fitness journey with the expectation that if they do it quote unquote right, they'll lose weight. But 100 years of research says that's not happening. Right? They're going to lose weight short term, they're going to plateau, they're going to gain it back, and then very many times they're going to quit. And they're going to blame themselves for that because they've been told and we've been taught that people who try hard enough can become thin through these methods. And it's simply not an evidence based position. All right, so that was sort of the Debbie Downer portion. Let's get into the good fun stuff. So, the benefits of size inclusive fitness. It's safer, right? When we create fitness that's not about weight loss, but that's about accommodating people of all sizes, that's about making sure that people have fun, safe environments, we create safer fitness experiences. We create experiences that are on the participants' terms. We work from a shame-free, blame-free, future-oriented place. We come from a weight neutral place, which means that we're not trying to manipulate body size. We're just looking at the participants' goals around our our area of expertise, strength, stamina, flexibility, technique. Um, and we're fully affirming of the person in that space. So when I talk about safe experiences, I mean not just physically safe, though that's incredibly important, right? That the area that the person is participating in, is moving in, is physically safe, that the equipment that they're using is physically safe and rated for their weight and size. That's incredibly important. But there's also psychologically safe, right? That we have a space where we don't tolerate weight stigma, where we don't tolerate toxic fitness culture, where people are know that they're welcomed and that they won't be judged, right? Where they know that they could come to an aqua class in a bathing suit and be treated very well and not have to worry about body shaming. All of that. And then there's, of course, accessible and affordable and enjoyable. And I will say, I think my community of weight neutral health and health at every size focuses too much on the idea of joyful and enjoyable movement. Now, joyful and enjoyable movement are amazing and completely valid relationships with moving. Moving because you enjoy it is great, but it's not for everybody. Right? There are people whose relationship with fitness is messed up. There are people who are dealing with chronic pain or chronic illness. And so while enjoyable is an option, it's not an obligation. Right? There are many reasons why people might participate. I do not enjoy distance running, walking. But I do like medals and they hand them out at the end. And so I did a couple marathons to do that. But it was not about health or enjoyment. Like health is like 20 miles ago, right? This is just about me wanting to cross the finish line and get a medal. And that's valid. But I think we have to be really clear that we've got to be on the participants' terms. And when we talk about safe. And so on the participants' terms, again, enjoyment can absolutely be the reason that somebody participates or one of the reasons. So for some people, like I said, it's about achievement or competition. For some people, they are wanting the general physical health benefits that movement can provide. And some people are looking for something very specific, right? They might be using movement as a way to help manage blood pressure or blood sugar. For some folks, it's about mental health. And I'm not saying like ditch your meds and do yoga, but for a lot of people, there are mental health benefits to doing fitness. Now, Any or all of these are completely legitimate. And one of the things when I work with people, and they're saying, like, for example, they're wanting to use movement to manage blood sugar, but they're like, look, I don't love movement. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, what do you find that you need to do? And they'll say, well, if I can do like 5 to 10 minutes after a meal, it really brings down the blood sugar spike. And it's like, okay, what type of movement do you hate the least? Dance videos on YouTube. Okay, let's do that in the least amount necessary to get the benefit you want and then be done. Right. And just the world that opens up for them to say, no, that's a valid relationship with fitness. Right. Figuring out the thing you hate the least and doing the bare minimum of it, that's valid. Right. Participating in fitness and thinking about it like laundry or dishes. Right. I don't love this, but it supports me. And so I do it. That's a valid relationship with fitness. And so what we can do is create a space where people can come to the space and reimagine outside of this toxic fitness culture, anti-fat fitness world. What could my relationship with fitness look like and how could it best serve me? And then how can we help them get that? That can create an incredible new paradigm for folks. And I'm going to cough and take a drink. And we can create a whole new world. And when we create spaces that allow that, where we're clear, look, this is about doing this on your terms. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. And we're here to be knowledgeable about that and to support you and to guide you to figure out what that is for you. That allows a lot more people to have that experience of feeling welcome and safe in a fitness experience. When I say shame-free, blame-free, future-oriented, shame-free means no body shaming, no fitness shaming, and no quit shaming. One of the things that I find really helps people especially if they're coming back to fitness after bad experiences, is discovering the joy of quitting. Right? This is no longer junior high and you join the softball team and you're going to keep this commitment. You're a grown person and you can choose to be in this or not, right? So maybe you're watching, American Ninja Warrior and you saw somebody doing some battle ropes and you thought that looked super cool. Okay, let's try those battle ropes. And you hate battle ropes. We are done with battle ropes and we've collected really important data. You don't like it. That's amazing, right? When we let people try things and quit things, right? Try my class. I used to tell people at the beginning of my class, if you're here for the first time and you're just trying it out and you realize it's not for you, you will not upset me at all if you decide to just go, right? I want you to have the fitness experience you want to have today. And if that's my class, amazing. And if not, also amazing. Right? We want to give people an opportunity to try things without that toxic fitness culture of you have to do it, you have to keep doing it, you have to do it even if you're miserable, right? We really want people to be able to explore in their own way. When I say blame free, not blaming bodies and not blaming clients. And this is a hard one to relearn sometimes, but the client isn't too big for the machine is too small for the client. Right? We never want to say your body's to blame. We want to apologize. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. These physio balls are older and they are not made to accommodate everyone. And, I want you to be safe. And I also want you to know that this isn't okay. And I'm going to say something to make sure that we get equipment that can work for everybody. Right? We never want to blame the client. If a client finds that they're not accommodated by our space, we want to apologize and we want to make it clear that there's nothing wrong with them. There is a problem with the space. Future oriented. This supports clients to be engaged and empowered, right? Clients may want to talk about their previous terrible fitness experiences, and that's absolutely reasonable and fine. And depending on what your particular scope and certifications are, that may be something for you to work with them on, or maybe something to refer out. But we also want to say, like, we can have a whole new journey. And it can be influenced by what you've learned before, but we can also just we can act like we're starting from scratch, or you can tell me, how you feel about stuff based on what you've done before, but we can really look forward and create a whole new relationship with fitness when we're creating these spaces. So how do we do that? How do we create inclusion in fitness spaces? First, accommodating spaces and training. We want to make sure everything around us is going to be as accommodating as possible. Policies and personnel, marketing and graphics, messaging, and merchandise. So accommodating spaces. This starts with seating. right? Anywhere that folks in your space might need or want to sit down, you want to make sure that you have sturdy armless chairs and or double wide like love seat chairs. You want to make sure that everyone of every size can sit in a space. And that's all the spaces, right? It's the waiting area and the outside. It's also if you have personal training rooms where people are coming to sit. If you only have chairs with arms, that's not going to accommodate everybody. And again, because of internalized weight stigma, higher weight people will tend to blame themselves or feel shame about that and will often sit in really uncomfortable spaces or simply not come. Right. So we want to make sure people are accommodated, making sure showers are accommodating to folks. And this isn't just, of course, higher weight people. This is also people with disabilities. This is also making sure you have spaces for people of all genders to feel comfortable. Bathrooms, same thing, equipment, and know the weight ratings of your equipment. There was recently a group of scientists who were doing some research around gym inclusion, and they had pictures of them trying to figure out the weight rating of the machine. And they were like laying on the ground, looking up with the iPhone flashlight, trying to read the little sticker. This is not okay. If you have things that are specifically weight rated, where you have equipment that has weight limits, you want that to be clear, right? It's unsafe. You don't want a machine to break under somebody, not just because it's unsafe for them physically, but it's unsafe for them psychologically because, again, of internalized weight stigma, they will tend to blame themselves. Training and group X, again, not making assumptions about people based on their size, knowing options or modifications. And I use modifications here because it's a common word, but I think it ends up being kind of a loaded word. It can end up being hierarchical. So I also, in my own classes, use options rather than saying this is a modification. I'll say, here are 3 options. Do whatever your body feels good doing today. Um, and understanding the body is never the problem. So if you teach a class where, for example, you're doing a forward fold, understand that that's going to be different for a body with a large belly or a body with a large chest. And so knowing that, if you're teaching yoga, knowing the modifications and the ways to use different props to make different poses work for different people, and saying, this pose was made, it does not work for everybody. So here are some options that you can do with that. And here's some equipment. Whatever disciplines you're teaching, know what the different options are to make that fit with different bodies and different body shapes. Again, knowing the weight ratings, so important. And having diverse instructors, we want people to see themselves represented, right? In everything from the art on the walls to the instructors in front of them to the gym staff to leadership. We want people to see themselves positively represented. One of the things that happens to higher weight people is the only way we see each other a lot, we see ourselves reflected rather in a gym space, is on like some kind of misguided before and after wall, right? Which says my body is seen as a problem to be solved in this space. And so to be size inclusive, we want a space where people see themselves represented positively, right? Not just as participants, but also as instructors and experts. So modifications, and again, this is a term I use here because it's the common term, but I would prefer options. So we want to use non-judgmental terminology, options, variations today. And this can take the pressure off. This isn't everything pretty much that I'm talking about here. It's not just about higher weight people. It's about people of all sizes, right? To say like, hey, how do you feel today gives people the option to feel like I don't have to do the advanced option, every single time I come in here just because I've been doing this a while, right? I can say, oh, I'm having a rough day. I didn't get a good sleep. I don't feel great. I'm going to do the first option, right? And then in group classes, you want to offer options to all attendees and not single people out unless they've asked you to tell them specifically. And again, don't make the body the problem. Not like, oh, you're too big to do this, or, your stomach's too big to do this, or you're too short, but just let's see if your body likes it this way better, right? Or, oh, that doesn't work for everybody. Luckily, there are lots of options. If you're dealing with something that doesn't, or a pose or a piece of equipment, I hate that this wasn't designed to work for all bodies. Let's try this instead, right? We want to be on a team with folks in these fitness spaces and against weight stigma. And then when people come at you with their own toxic fitness culture, you can say, oh, that, you know what, that's toxic fitness culture talking. The best fitness is the fitness that works for your body, right? If people do engage in body blaming, there's nothing wrong with your body. You're not too big. This thing is too small. Know the options for the disciplines that you teach and coach. And it might be like a wider stance or not being afraid to move the body around. I was taking a yoga class and we were in a forward fold with our legs in a V. And she said, sweep your belly into the belly well. And so we sort of moved our bellies and then folded over. And it was incredible. And it was just like, yeah, you can touch and move your body to make this work. No modifications to decrease load. So, and this is again for people of all sizes, may not be in a place where body weight exercises is appropriate for them. So, no ways to decrease load. Consider weights before and instead of body weight exercises. And be aware that moves can look and feel different on different bodies. And this happened to me a lot as a competitive dancer. People would think I was doing something wrong because they were used to seeing it on a thin person. And so then when I would do it, they'd be like, "Oh, that doesn't look right." And so I would, work with them or take a lesson with them and they'd say, "Oh no, your technique's correct." We can again, because of toxic fitness culture, most of the examples we see are thin bodies, right? Very few to no celebrity trainers who are fat. And so when we see these things demonstrated, we typically see them demonstrated on a thin body. And so that can give us a misperception of what it's going to look like on a fatter body. Consider yoga blocks and straps, including to hold breasts or chest down, burpees and planks on an incline, extra padding like a garden kneeler, seated or standing options for normally all fours poses, teaching people to get up off the floor, right? Often there's a technique because if you have a large belly, you can't just tuck your feet under you and pop up. And so I often use a figure 4 pose and then have them sweep that front leg around, come up on the shin and push up, or having them get on the ground near a bench or something that they can push on to get up. Using a power rack so that when people want to get up, they have something to grab onto. If somebody has kind of that shelf bum, understand it might not work for them to have their feet on the ground for a bench press. And again, using a towel or strap if their arms don't reach all the way around. Coping with injuries. Injuries happen if we're trying to create a size inclusive space. We can talk about things like, again, not blaming the body for the injury, helping the client not blame the body for the injury, supporting them and working with a healthcare professional, and asking questions like what options will be offered to a thinner person. One of the things that happens to higher weight people in terms of injuries is that they will get an acute injury, the same kind of injury that anybody gets doing that exercise, right? So they'll have like some knee pain. And whereas a thin person would go to the doctor and they would get things like physical therapy and massage and these kind of recommendations, a higher weight person will be told that the problem is their weight and they should lose weight. And so they will go and they will exercise on an acute injury and they will turn that acute injury into a chronic injury. Right. And so we want to be clear, like, this is what we do for folks with these injuries, and we can help and support them in getting that kind of help. All right, policies and personnel. Truly welcoming diversity first means you are specifically, explicitly welcome here. And so here again, we want to have a space where people see themselves positively represented, where the website is clear that this is a space that welcomes them. 2, you will be treated well here. And this goes back to having policies, right? These are our core values, and we believe these things and we publicize them and we make it clear. And then number 3, critically, your mistreatment will not be tolerated here. And this one is a huge one, right? I was in a gym when a woman came up to the front desk and a Black woman talked about an experience of racism she had just had. And the front desk person said, "Oh, well, I'm sure they didn't mean it that way." Right? That's not it. It has to be, these are our policies and this is what we do when it happens. Right? And that comes down to training and it comes down to everyone understanding this is the core value and here's how we make sure that that core value gets respected in our space. Staff diversity, again, administration, trainers, teachers, leadership, creating that representation, providing access to lived experience. Through no fault of their own, a group of people who have always been like considered quote unquote good in fitness, right? They were successful in PE classes, they were college athletes, now they're leading fitness. That group of people is going to be missing a lot of lived experience around fitness, right? That's very different from their own. So when we have groups of people with diverse experiences, we have access to lived experience expertise we couldn't get other ways. And if necessary, bringing in outside experts to make sure that you have that full complement. Marketing messages. All right. This is where we're going to learn why I do this instead of being a graphic designer. I didn't even put a copyright on these because no one would ever use them, right? These are examples. These are not anything that I would use for real. So we want to avoid stigmatizing terms in our messaging. We don't want to use terms like quote overweight or quote obese or quote excess weight. We want to avoid weight stigma based cliches like pack on the pounds or tip the scales or lose the freshman or COVID-15. We want to avoid body shaming terms unless we're using those as reclaiming terms, right? So none of this muffin top, spare tire, referring to body parts negatively. No headless fatties. That's when you see the fat person and it's just their midriff completely dehumanized, right? None of that. And we want to avoid ableism as well. And it's really important to me using Kimberly Crenshaw's framework of intersectionality that I be intersectional in my work, right? And ableism is one of the things that I want to talk about because it intersects with weight stigma so much, right? We never want to use disability as a cautionary tale or a negative state, right? That's just ableism, and that creates spaces that are unsafe for folks who have those disabilities. Substitutions. Instead of overweight or quote obese, people of all sizes or higher weight people. Instead of lose weight, get stronger, get more fit, work out on your own terms. Instead of fun run, fun walk, run, or roll, right? Thinking of ways, how can this apply to everyone, to more people? Marketing conversations. When people come in and we're talking to them about joining the space or doing personal training, asking, like, what brought you here? Right? And what have your previous experiences been like, good and bad? And then listen and check assumptions and stereotypes and then offer weight neutral options, right? Often people are going to come in and say, I want to lose weight. And there's a couple options at that point. We can start with them where they are and say, okay, we can talk about that. But like, let's also create some other goals because we can't necessarily control whether or not we lose weight. Or we can be super honest and say, oh, you know what? I just want to let you know that 100 years of research has shown that that's, probably not going to happen. And these are and that's obviously incredibly condensed version of the conversation that you would have, right? And it depends on your knowledge, it depends on your scope, but we also have to be giving people ethical evidence-based advice. And so even if we start with where they are, totally understand you want to lose weight. Can you tell me why? What are you hoping weight loss will do for you? Right. And then going from there, because if they're hoping to become stronger, to be able to climb stairs and not get out of breath, that's a pretty common one that I hear. If they're preparing for a vacation to Disney World and they want to be walking around a lot, there are lots of options that we can use that are weight neutral that can still help them reach those goals. All right, so graphics. We want to choose graphics with diverse bodies and not just size diversity again, and show higher weight people as teachers and trainers and experts, not just students, and not just the person doing like the least taxing or the lowest impact option, right? We want diverse bodies doing diverse things. So this is an example, whether you want to be strong enough to lift your grandkid or strong enough to compete in the senior games, we can help, right? Giving that message around strength. We can help you with the strength and stamina for a day at the beach or to dominate your next basketball game. Fitness comes in all sizes. If you want to be stronger, fitter, or just enjoy moving your amazing body, we're here to support you. Again, giving people lots of options, letting a lot of different people see themselves positively represented and in a weight neutral way. If you have merchandise, making sure it's size inclusive. If you have prizes that you're giving out for something, making sure the prizes are the same for everyone. Having diverse representation on the merchandise and having diverse representation in merchandise marking. And I can tell you, I have done so many races, including my first marathon, though not the second, where the free t-shirt that came with the event did not come in my size at all. Right? This is not an inclusive experience. So we want to make sure that people feel really included. All right. And so what if they want weight loss? So let's have this as a larger conversation. And again, this is going to be really common. And they didn't get this idea out of nowhere. Right. So when they say they want to lose weight, we respond like, why? What are you hoping weight loss will do? And for a lot of people, they will not be ready for that question because it's such a reflexive thing. What do you want to do? I want to lose weight. Of course you do. Let's go. And so when you say, okay, why? Like, what are you hoping weight loss will do? That gives people a lot of options to really start talking about their own experiences. So, general options. You can start with AR and provide information as you go, right? So you can say, okay, I understand that is your goal. And at that point, I also recommend saying, like, what are some other goals along the way? And maybe gently saying, we can't always control what happens with the size of our bodies, but we can work on like fitness specific things. And we can explain that by saying weight loss isn't behavior, right? We're in the behavior business. Weight loss is not a behavior, and people's bodies respond differently. It's the same thing when people promise they can get you like a butt like so and so's. That's just not the case, right? People's bodies are genetically different. People's bodies are going to respond differently. So when we help them to focus on something other than or in addition to weight loss, then we give them opportunities for success, right? And we get them to keep going. So when they do lose a little weight and then they plateau and start gaining it back, they come to us and we can say, yeah, this is a really common experience that people have. And depending on your relationship and your scope, you may have had this conversation up front. You know, for a lot of people, they lose weight short term and gain it back. And unfortunately, that's what the research says will happen to most people. And so that may be your experience. It may not. Let's look at some other goals too, so that we can look at your progress. And for some folks, they may want to get some blood work done so they can actually look at things like cholesterol or blood sugar. They may want to look at their blood pressure because those are things that we positively impact with fitness that sometimes are not tracked at all, or the assumption is those will be made better by changing body size when in fact they're impacted directly. Um, you may say, I can't ethically offer weight loss. This is what I ultimately ended up doing in my own fitness work, was to say, you know, knowing the research that I do, I'm very happy to talk to you about it, but I can work on you on strength, stamina, flexibility, technique. I can do a lot of different things, but weight loss isn't something I feel that I can ethically offer you. And I lost clients, and that was something that I could do. And you may not be in a position to do that financially or, in your current situation, but you may be, and you may choose to make that choice as well. You may choose to talk about the research. You may explain how a weight neutral focus provides more benefits with less risk. So when we ask somebody, what are you hoping weight loss is going to do for you? It's typically into three buckets. Either they're trying to treat or prevent health issues, and or they're trying to improve mobility or ability, and or they're trying to avoid weight stigma. I'm sorry, I'm going to cough again. And so, depending on which bucket they're in, we have some options to talk to them. If they're wanting to treat or prevent health issues, first of all, make sure you're practicing within your scope. But it's important to understand people of all sizes get the same health issues, right? We hear this idea of weight related or quote obesity related health issues. These are just health issues that people of all sizes that get called weight related when fat people have them, right? So being thin can neither be a sure preventative or a sure cure. We know that weight loss is unlikely to work, and we know that a weight neutral focus provides more benefit with less risk. So we can, even if we say, okay, like, I understand you want to lose weight, but we can also impact this directly. And we can talk to them again about those other goals and about looking at other measurements. Again, if they're trying to increase mobility or ability, people of all sizes get these issues. And so often it's about immediate help, right? If somebody's going to Disney World in 3 weeks and they're currently, walking about a block comfortably, then it might be about saying, hey, did you know they rent scooters at Disney World? Right. And you can get around and have a really comfortable and fun experience rather than being in pain. That is an option for you. One of the things that happens in our culture is that often we look at mobility or assistive devices or compensatory strategies as last resorts, right? Oh, well, if we use, a scooter, then they'll never regain mobility. And that's simply not true. And what often happens is we trap that person and keep them from having the experiences that they could have with a mobility or assistive device or compensatory strategy. So part of what we've got to do is work to decrease the stigma on that. And then if we're working on improving mobility or ability, it's about, okay, what are we looking at here? Strength, stamina, flexibility, technique, gait, like what is it that we can do to work and improve mobility and ability in your particular body and situation. If they're trying to avoid weight stigma, this one is super tough because weight stigma is real and it impacts people in real ways in every aspect of their lives. And so we can be honest about that. And again, depending on your scope, We can be clear that their body is not the problem, that weight stigma is the problem. We can give them tools to deal with stigma. So for me, for example, what I've realized is that weight stigma harms me in a lot of different ways, and weight stigma is real. And I had spent years fighting my own body on behalf of weight stigma. And so what I decided to do instead was fight weight stigma on behalf of my body. And that made a huge difference for me. And so just knowing that's an option can be really important. Connecting them to community. So I have some folks here, and these are their Instagram handles. Ilya Parker from Decolonizing Fitness does incredible work. Latoya Shante Snell is a marathoner and ultra marathoner. Myrna Valerio is a ultra runner. Martinez Evans has the Slow AF Running Club, is also a marathoner. Shannon Canisage, they are a yoga instructor with Fringish, and then Leslie Jordan Garcia with Liberati Wellness is a personal trainer and an athlete who talks about these things. So helping people to see themselves positively represented. Often, if you don't know that you can do something, it's not even within your world of thinking, right? And too often fat people don't see themselves represented in these ways, and so they assume they can't. I haven't ballroom danced for years, but I still have some YouTube videos out there, and I still hear from people on a weekly basis who say, I've always wanted to dance and someone showed me your video and I never saw anybody my size doing this, and I'm so excited to start. Right? So having that representation can be so critical for folks. So again, asking questions and then reframing, providing options, and getting informed consent. So informed consent, and again, this is about scope of service, but if you're looking for a way to have this conversation, you can say, like, you're very likely to lose weight short term and gain it back long term, and that is not your fault. This is the body's response to restriction and weight loss. It's to become better at gaining and maintaining weight. Understanding that it could create physical and psychological harm, and understanding that as they're in the weight loss phase and they're being praised. Because what happens is people get all of this praise during that short-term weight loss, and then when they plateau and regain the weight, all of that praise ends up becoming derision, right? And difficulty. And now they feel like they failed because they don't understand that they didn't fail at the intervention failed them, but also they failed knowing that their friends and family and randos on the internet liked them better when they were thin. So again, the benefits of size inclusive fitness here, it's more ethical and evidence-based. It provides more benefits with less risk, and it's more inclusive. So we're going to get into the Q&A in just a second. And again, you can email me, Ragen@weightandhealthcare.com or Ragen@sizeforsuccess.com. You can message me on Instagram. You can find more resources. So the HAES Health Sheets, HAES Health Sheets, it stands for Health at Every Size. These are diagnosis-specific weight neutral care guides that you can like download type 2 diabetes and see what are the weight neutral ways to manage that. There's also a resource and a research bank. So if you are also a mega nerd and you want to dig into the research, that's a place you can start. And then weightandhealthcare.com is my newsletter where I kind of write about these things endlessly. I just wrote a piece about the whole idea of telling higher weight people not to strength train. And so when you go back to the recording, I want to offer, these are the research that went into this particular talk. And so you can go back and pause and find it. So that is what I've got. We are stopping the share and we are moving into the Q&A. I know this was long, and I know folks have different stuff to do. Please feel free to put your chats into the chat itself or to come off mute and ask questions directly. And again, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful.